and welcome to Growth Talks Podcast. It's a place where you can find tools, advice, suggestions, ideas, and so much more on personal and professional growth coming from experts in these areas. My name is Snezhana. I'm your host for today, but I'm also a leadership trainer and an executive coach. And it is a pleasure to introduce my guest for today. Anna is a therapist, an entrepreneur, a business owner, a runner. That kind of stuck with me. But before I go into too many details, I'll let you introduce yourself. So, Anna, can you share? Well, first of all, welcome. And then can
Thank
you share
you.
a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. It's great to be here and thank you for inviting me. This was a lovely introduction. Actually, that's how I would start. A therapist, a clinical psychologist, happily married, a runner, entrepreneur. I would add somebody that specializes in burnout and perfectionism. Those are my core topics, very personal for me and my areas of expertise so I've been a therapist for more than a decade now, and had privilege of working with clients from all around the world. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. We have an amazing topic coming up.
Yes.
So
Yes. Well, again, it's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for the kind words. I look forward to digging in. So, I know you mentioned you specialize in burnout and perfectionism, and we're going to dive into a very specific aspect of perfectionism. But just for the people who may not know, can you just share in very general terms what perfectionism is?
oh, I would describe it as this constant nagging pressure of not feeling, being, and doing enough. It is this constant questioning, self-criticism, unhealthy form of ambition that often drives you in exhaustion.
Mm,
Um, it's not just about high standards, which is how perfectionism is often perceived. It's about tying your own worth to how flawlessly you're being and performing. So we always connect perfectionism to, it has to be perfect.
right.
But it is often that this idea of perfect is just a way to ensure that you are being and doing enough. So, perfect by our own definition, what is perfect? And we often lack that definition. So, it expands and expands because we always, when we can do more, when we can achieve more, we set new criteria for what is perfect. And that constant pressure to achieve more, be more, do more, is what perfectionism is really about.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I don't think I've I haven't done much research, so to start with that, but I don't think I've ever heard that kind of explanation, and it does
Mm.
really make sense. You're right. Even me personally, it's always about, oh, it has to be perfect, but uh, I'm sure there's so much more in the background that we're not even aware of that contributes to that feeling of it's never
Yeah,
good enough.
yeah,
Okay.
I think we always talk about, unrealistic expectations, perfectionism and unrealistic expectations. But I have this um, reservation towards the very word realistic. And I
Uh-huh.
think it's this mismatch actually between what are my current capacities, what I can do, and what I am currently able to do versus what would I expect myself to be able to do. So we often have these standards that are unmatched with our current capacities. And sometimes it's not just, this idea of being perfect. It doesn't have to be, tied to some kind of an ideal. It can be tied to who I was before. So I pressure
Mm.
myself to be a certain kind of person that I was before, or to achieve what I was able to do before. So it's it's really about what is perfect for us and what standards do we set for ourselves versus what capacities do we have and how we treat ourselves when we ask more of ourselves.
Right, right. And as you mentioned, there's often lack of clarity. I know through coaching, I work with a lot of clients who want to see a better version of themselves, but they're very unclear of what that better version looks like. And I think it's great for us to always strive to learn more, to improve, to grow, but everything within its own limits and boundaries. So, one step at a time, or if the image that we're striving towards is too grand, it's really hard to achieve it, even if we break it down into smaller steps. So I think that lack of clarity, at least from a coaching perspective, that's something that I run into a lot. So I always ask, okay, well, if if let's say you do everything you wanted to do, what would that look like? And so that's when they get stuck, and it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's this and that, or maybe it's like this. And then when you force them, I encourage them to write it down, because I think once we start writing things down or record themselves, whatever's easier. But when it's tangible, you get to see it, you get to hear what you're saying in your head, really. It Then I think it becomes more like, oh, maybe not that. Maybe I need to change for something else.
Yeah, and
But
it's often that we set these goals that we set for ourselves, we treat them as the end point. So when
right,
we reach that, we'll be happy, we'll be satisfied, right? And then you reach that point, and then your definition of what is possible expands. And when it expands, then you set new criteria. And it's always this, that's why I was referring to this pressure of never feeling enough, because you endlessly set goals that aim to in the end to put you in this position where you'll be this idea of yourself that is accomplished, that is successful, but the moment you accomplish it, it doesn't feel like a big deal anymore. And I think that's why usually the people that I work with are stuck in this endless loop of achieving great results and never really feeling accomplished, never really feeling like they're satisfied with what they're accomplishing, because there is this next level.
right, right. Yeah, and we don't really stop
Mm,
to feel that victory,
yeah.
that win. We don't stop to say, well, maybe I want to do more now, but hey, a year ago this is what I wanted to do, and I'm here, so well done me. And then move forward. I think even if
Yeah,
we allowed ourselves that moment of satisfaction and gratitude for being able to achieve what we have,
absolutely.
even that may move the needle in some direction, let alone being aware of the standards, the expectations, and everything else that we put on ourselves. Okay, well, I want to pick your brains about a specific aspect of perfectionism. So when you and I were talking about potential topics, what we could discuss, we said, how about this fear of failure and how we can
Mm,
support ourselves to move
right,
on and move forward when we fail? So my first question for you is, what is it about this fear of failure that's so paralyzing, that just blocks us sometimes from going after the things we truly desire?
right. Great question. Well, I think the core question there is, what is failure, right? And then in answering what is failure for us will uncover why we fear it and why it is paralyzing for us. It is the meaning that we attach to what failure is. So failure is, as you would know from working with clients as well, it's less about the direct outcome of that failure, the concrete consequences that you have to cope with. It's more about what you think failure says about you,
Mm,
that it makes you in some way unworthy, incompetent, naive, um, unaccomplished, whatever it is. And it is this idea of who we are if we fail in specific way, right? What is failure? What are the criteria of failure, and what are the criteria of success? Sometimes I work with perfectionists who have a very narrow definition of what success is and very wide definition of what can be considered failure. So criticism could be a failure, and also bad results. What are bad results, right? And I don't aim to um, put the, treat failure as something that can always be relative, but it is. It is relative, in a way that we do attach meaning to it.
Right.
We do attach meaning to it, and it depends if we consider something failure or just an attempt that where we had certain expectations, and the results of that attempt didn't meet the expectations. If we treat that as experience, it no longer has this meaning of who we are if we went through it. So I think what is paralyzing about fear, what is paralyzing about failure, is the meaning we attach to it.
That makes sense. Yeah, the way we perceive it and interpret it, definitely.
Right.
And I love what you said about, you said, sometimes feeling incompetent, unworthy. I think for me, it's always been that incompetency.
Mhm.
If I fail, then I can't do it. Which on a logical level, of course, it doesn't make sense. Of course,
Mm,
we live and we learn. And I always take an example of a child, when we see kids learn how to walk, talk, because if you really look at it that way, there's gazillion mistakes that they make because they fail on a daily basis, many, many, many times. But that doesn't stop us from walking, standing up, talking, growing. We see it as, we don't even think about it, I think, in early childhood, but then as we become more aware of what's good and what's success and how it should be, then we start
and what pace it
perceiving.
should happen at, how fast. I have clients that treat something as failure not because they haven't reached their goals, but because they haven't reached them fast enough.
Right,
Right. So it's also that pace. Have I accomplished what I intended in this time frame that I set for myself?
right,
So this is always, I never assume that I know what are the criteria for succeeding or failing for my client, and they often change. We talked about how the definition expands,
right.
right? Um, so I always ask the question, what is failure for you? What does it mean to fail? Okay, so when you experience, for example, that means that I don't earn this much from this project,
Okay.
or that it has this certain result. Okay, what does that result say about the process, about you, about the company? So I look at the parties involved, right? What does it say? Because the way you interpret it affects how you believe you should act towards that.
Mm,
Um, so it is, when we talk about responsibility, I always like to break that word down into ability to respond, right? Responsibility, ability to respond. So taking responsibility is to look at your ability to respond to your own interpretation of what failure is. So,
I love that.
yeah,
That's a very, thank you for sharing that. I love that perspective. Interesting.
thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Uh, wh- you were talking about, the our perception kind of defining our next steps. How can we reword? How can we change that perspective? Is there anything that clearly, I mean, we can always work with a coach, a therapist, so there's always help that we can get.
Mhm.
But is there anything on our own that maybe we can do to deal with that interpretation or to change that
Mhm.
interpretation of failure?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we can start by asking ourselves these questions that we mentioned. What is failure for me? Why do I see this as failure? Um, um, would somebody else see it in a different light than I am? What are other perspectives that I could include? A version of me 10 years from now, would that version still think of this as failure? Or some other version of myself, would they think of this as failure? But sometimes I think it's very important to acknowledge that we are tied to our own definitions of
Mm,
failure, and that we kind of pressure ourselves into not considering different perspectives. And that's also something to consider. Why am I so determined to see this as failure? If I see it only as failure, what is it that I can do then? Why? Because sometimes seeing something as failure and concluding I'm incompetent is a position that is very secure, I would
mm,
say. Secure, you feel bad about yourself, but you're protected. You're
right.
protecting yourself from trying again because you don't believe that you can really succeed. So why trying? Right. So I have to see this as failure, and I have to see myself as incompetent, because if I dare to see this as okay, this is just an attempt, let me try again, then I need to put in effort
Right.
to to try again and maybe fail again. And how will I survive that failure? So it's important, I would say, to look at different perspectives, to talk to different people, to consider what other people would think, or what other versions of myself would think of this, but also to consider, why am I so attached to seeing this as failure?
Mm,
Why?
mm,
And that, I think, can give us some very, very useful insights.
right. Anna, there may be some parents out there who are watching this. One of I don't know if you're familiar with Sarah Blakely. She was one of the um, business women who inspired. She really, her story got to me. But one thing she said is, in her childhood, her father really encouraged them to fail. So to try new things,
Mhm.
and then to come back and report on
Right.
not what they succeeded at, but what they failed at. And then they would talk about it. So she said, of course, that helped her
That's right.
grow up with this mindset and perspective of it's just part of
Mhm.
life, part of process. Do you think if as parents we did more around mistakes and failure and did something to teach our kids that it's fine, it's just part of the process, would that be helpful? Is there anything that maybe we can do as parents? I know this is not our topic, but it just what you shared got me thinking about how can we help the future generations feel differently
Oh,
about this.
absolutely. The very thing you mentioned is reframing failure as part of the process, not the end of it.
Right.
It could be the end of a certain chapter, right? And then you restart. Um, you start again, right? So I think reframing failure, that it is the beginning. As an athlete, um, I I was watching a basketball game yesterday, and I was just thinking about, how many times you have to shoot to score,
Right.
and how even sometimes when they talk about, this was a perfect game, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. And there are a lot of um, um, failures in it. There are a lot of missed shots, but when we miss a shot that we thought was very important, we feel that is the end of it. We kind of put the ball on the side and go, we decide not to play anymore. So what if we looked at failure as a part of the game? It's a part of the game. But it's very, I think it takes courage to start again. It takes courage
Right.
to try to fail through, to it's what I said in the beginning, tying your worth to how flawlessly you perform is the very definition of perfectionism. And we often lack that patience um, to discover who we are through failure as well, and how we can succeed through failing, how we can succeed at failing. Also, you can fail better,
Right.
you can
Yep.
fail up, you know.
Right.
I often say that, it's not about making mistakes, avoiding making mistakes. It's about making better mistakes. And it is, as experts, I believe that we are paid for the mistakes that we've made and then learn from them. And then because of that, we can be paid for the complexity of the problem that we solve, because we can see many different levels and that you can make mistakes, and we can point to them and we can lead people through making mistakes through that learning curve that is inevitable, right? So absolutely reframing failure as a part of the process, not the end of it.
Right. Right. Yes, I love that. I used to be the person, you know, looking back at my life, I the first time I always bring this story when we talk about failure because it was the first time I realized that I didn't learn how to fail because, I was good at school, I was a good student, things just went well. Um, I'm pretty sure I avoided many things where I thought I could fail, so I just kind of safely not decided not to do them along the way. But then I started driving and I failed my first driving test, not the test itself, but like the driving itself. And I was devastated. That was a shock for me. How can so many people pass this in the first try and I can't? And so
What
that
does it say about me?
yes, and logically, of course, I was like, whatever, people fail. I mean, you'll do it next time, it'll be fine. But emotionally, that was so hard for me. It was so hard to accept the fact that I didn't do something that most people do just fine with, that I had to redo it. I had to retake it. And it was that was the moment where I realized, okay, I need to work. I need to work on, my not making everything that I try and not avoiding things that where I feel like I can fail just because I don't want to get hurt. So I know it's a process. And on that note, how can we support ourselves? So for me, I think it was maybe just my internal drive that, I'm gonna pass this no matter what. And so I kind of got through it. But how can we support ourselves when we fail, when we make mistakes, to keep going? Because more often than not, many people would say, okay, that's it. I tried it. I'm done. It's not for me. I'm not good for that. I'll just do something else. And then we walk away from maybe our goals, our dreams, the things we really, really wanted to accomplish. What do you have any tips, anything that we can do to say, okay, dust yourself off, stand up, keep going?
Yeah. Um, a part of the solution is definitely
Hmm.
reframing failure. So going back to the discussion that we started on how we perceive failure, think it's about what we say to ourselves.
Right.
That plays a big role. So what do I say to myself? Am I incompetent for not passing driver's test or whatever the first time around? So what am I saying to myself is, how I treat myself. What is the level of compassion that I have with myself in this process, the level of patience that I have with myself in the process. I think that is a big part of overcoming failure. And just acknowledge that often it is not the consequences that we are afraid of, the very consequences the problems that we need to solve after a certain failure happens. It's more about what we say to ourselves in terms of who we are because of that failure. So I like to distinguish the different approaches. So one is solution oriented, and the
Uh-huh.
other is judgment oriented.
Okay.
So, okay, I failed. What is failure here? Okay, failure is these are the results of a certain process that I had. For example, I tried, I attempted to pass a driving test, and I failed. Right? Okay, what is the solution to it? Okay, you now have the option to walk away from it and decide not to, never to drive again, or you can, go and try new things, and let's see what can support you. Not new things, the same thing, but
Yeah, maybe take
again,
a
you
couple
can
more
go and
lessons, right?
but maybe you can also try new things. Maybe you can try driving in a different way with a different school, with a different kind of practice. What are the possible solutions with which you can support yourself? And then there is this judgment oriented approach. And that is very important to just acknowledge, what am I doing to myself? I'm saying to myself, I'm incompetent, or what I would say to myself when it comes to driving, I lack coordination.
Uh-huh.
Right? I'm not observant enough. I'm not vigilant enough to be able to drive, and I have this weapon in my, the wheel is, the weapon that I'm carrying, and I put this burden on myself, what it means if I am not a super successful, confident driver. The very first time not the very first time, but at the beginning,
Yeah,
right? So it's
yeah,
very important to distinguish the two. Am I looking for solutions, or am I just focusing on judgment? And if I'm judging myself, to just acknowledge look at what I'm saying to myself. Is
yeah,
it fair? Are there different things that I could be saying to myself?
yeah.
Okay, everybody fails. Not everybody, but a lot of people fail,
Well,
right?
I think,
Whatever it is.
oh, yeah, when it comes to driving, maybe not everybody, but
Yeah,
in general,
driving,
we
but
all,
anything.
yeah,
We I think if we look at it, it's but just what we consider to be failure. We make mistakes on a daily basis,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's just a part of who we are as human beings.
right.
And our learning process happens through mistakes.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. One thing that you mentioned, the self-talk, and one thing
mhm.
that I usually recommend, even for people who are not into writing, but to make that tangible. So instead of just because, when we're in our head, things
Right.
can go crazy. So instead of just nagging yourself in your head, try to write down what you're telling yourself. I
Right.
think, from my experience, when I have clients do this in our sessions, they stop after, I think, sentence three, because they realize how horrible it sounds and how harsh we are with ourselves. And you would probably never say these things to anybody else, but we have no problem saying it to ourselves. So when we make it more tangible in the sense of it's written down or even recorded for people who prefer speaking and don't like to write, but hearing it and hearing what
Right.
you're saying to yourself, mm, you'd probably more likely want to change it immediately just because it doesn't feel good. And I think, instead of staying in our head, which is really easy to go
Mhm.
all over the place, seeing what you're doing to yourself I think it does
Having
affect
that
us.
distance from, when you're in your head, you tend to trust your own thoughts. You
Right?
tend to become your own thoughts, but when you put it in writing, then you can, distance yourself. You can observe your thoughts, and I think that
I
is
love
a
that.
wonderful technique. And it gives us that distance to recognize whose voice is that.
Mm, right.
Who talked to you in a different way? Who would you expect to talk to you in a different way? In this way, sorry.
Hmm,
And
hmm.
what is a different way to talk to yourself? Um, So it gives you the space to also recognize how you've internalized certain voices, critical voices of others that maybe lack the patience with you through your learning process.
Right.
So you can start to ask yourself, how can I be more patient with myself in this process? How can I bounce back? What are the solutions that, what are the options, what is my ability to respond in this moment to this situation, so my responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
and then how can I support myself? What would a supportive person say to me in this moment, so I could be that person for myself now. And that can also be written down. I often ask my clients to record their own supportive voice and then to listen to it when they
Play it.
get stuck, just to hear it from themselves again.
Yeah.
So that definitely helps. Those are techniques that are very useful.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. We're reaching the end of our talk, believe it or not. I feel like it's been 5 minutes only, but so not to prolong this too much, even though I think there's so much more to say on the topic, of course. Mm, I wanted to ask, are there any tips, advice, suggestions, anything that you would like to share that we didn't cover and you thought was important as you were processing this topic for today?
Um, I think we said a lot of things. I wouldn't add much to it. Just as an athlete, half marathon runner, I would I always think of, of the importance of starting again. We celebrate being on that starting line. We don't just talk about the finish line and what happens there and the results of, how fast was the race, or, how long the race was, but just the very idea that you're running, the very idea
Mm-hmm.
that you are attempting something, the very idea that you are on the starting line of something new or something different or something old, but in a new way. You're showing up for another idea, another person, a new project. That is something to be celebrated. So it's not just about reframing failure, but also celebrating um, um, coming back, coming back from failure, coming back to a new starting line. I think that is so powerful.
It definitely sounds powerful, and thank you so much for sharing that. I love what you said there. It's so important for us to acknowledge that, I mean, people build businesses and fail, and businesses go bankrupt and then they start again, and so, there are disasters that happen. If we talk about like worst case scenarios, you lose people, you lose your home, everything, and then we just rebuild. We start again, and I think it's part of our nature to not give up. Now, I guess it's maybe a matter of how important it is for us, and then what we want to do about it. But thank you. That was great. I got goosebumps as you were sharing that. So
Yeah.
I love it. Anna, what are the ways if somebody wants to get in touch with you or connect anything? How can they reach you?
So you can reach me through LinkedIn.
Hmm.
If you speak Serbian, then you can work with me directly through my programs. A Break Free from Perfectionism and a program on procrastination, Get It Done.
Hmm.
But if you speak English, you don't speak Serbian, then you're also welcome to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email. I suppose that you will have
Yes.
my contact
Yes.
details.
As
So
always, we share all the links
yeah.
and
So
everything
if you have any questions for me, or you just want to talk to me and see in which ways we could work together, the best ways to just reach out and then we can start the conversation.
fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate sharing your thoughts and, you being willing to share your knowledge and experience with us. Um, as always, those of you who are watching, If you like this, if you think the topic resonates with you, let us know so that we can bring more content like this. Anna, thanks again for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, see you guys. Bye.